That camera was a violation of community privacy, Mr. Thorne. I confiscated it for the good of the neighborhood, and you'll be receiving a formal citation and a fine in the mail. The words slithered out of her mouth with the unearned confidence of a petty tyrant, her floral print muumuu shifting in the breeze like a battle standard for the terminally bored. She was standing 5 feet inside my property line, a line I had surveyed and marked myself, holding my Reconix trail camera in her hand as if it were a captured enemy flag. Her name was Karen Miller, president of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association, a kingdom of beige vinyl siding and weaponized passive aggression that bordered my 10 acres of woods. I wasn't in her kingdom. I wasn't even a vassal. I was just the guy who owned the property next door. And in her eyes, that made my land an unruly, unregulated province that desperately needed her benevolent oversight. I had watched her on my security feed waddle right past my clearly posted "no trespassing" signs, her eyes locked on the camouflage-cased camera I'd strapped to an old oak tree. She'd fumbled with the strength for a full minute, her breathy exertions picked up by the camera's own microphone, before finally ripping it free with a triumphant grunt. Now, standing before me, she clutched it to her chest like a holy relic, her face a mask of righteous indignation. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. She had trespassed on my land to steal my property and was now lecturing me about violations. It was a masterclass in hypocrisy, delivered by a woman whose primary contribution to society seemed to be measuring the height of her neighbor's grass with a ruler. The sheer audacity of it all, the absolute certainty in her eyes that she was in the right, made the blood in my veins run cold and hot at the same time. If you know what it feels like to have your sanctuary invaded by someone who believes their trivial rules trump your fundamental rights, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And in the comments below, tell me where you're watching from and drop your own HOA nightmare story. Because I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a battle that a lot of you know all too well. Now let's get back to how this woman's little power trip ended up costing her everything. I bought this land for a reason. After 20 years as an Army combat engineer, clearing routes in places where the ground itself was the enemy, I wanted silence. I wanted a buffer. My property was a long, rectangular tract of mostly undeveloped woods, with my small, self-designed house set way back from the road, invisible to the world. The back of my property pressed up against the manicured border of the Whispering Pines HOA, a world of synchronized lawn sprinklers and covenants dictating the approved shades of mailbox paint. I respected their world. I just didn't want to live in it. The property line was marked with iron survey pins at each corner and a well-maintained fence on my side that was more of a suggestion than a barrier. I kept it clear, a 10-foot wide path I mowed myself, not because I had to, but because good fences and clear lines make good neighbors. Or so I thought. My first interaction with Karen had been a letter, printed on ostentatious cream-colored letterhead with the HOA's swooping pine tree logo embossed in gold. It informed me that the unmown scrub brush along my property line was visually displeasing to the residents of Whispering Pines and was in violation of community aesthetic standards. It politely demanded I clear it. I politely filed it in the trash. I wasn't in her community. Her standards weren't my problem. This led to a series of escalating letters, each one more demanding than the last. She was like a bureaucratic mosquito, a persistent, annoying buzz you couldn't quite swat. The trail camera wasn't for her. It was for the deer, the foxes, and the occasional black bear that ambled through my woods. It was for my own peace of mind after I found a few beer cans and an empty chip bag near a game trail that crossed from the HOA common area onto my land. I wasn't spying on anyone. I was monitoring my own property, a right I'd thought was fairly fundamental. The camera was motion activated, silent, and its infrared flash was invisible to the naked eye. It uploaded photos and short video clips to a secure cloud server. It was a passive observer in the woods. Until today, when Karen had decided it was an act of war. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind my drill sergeant taught me to take before breaching a door. "Ma'am," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "you are currently trespassing on my private property. You are holding my private property, which you have stolen. I'm going to give you exactly one opportunity to place the camera back on the ground and walk back to your side of that survey marker. If you do that, we can pretend this never happened." Her face purpled, the indignation swelling until I thought she might pop. "I will do no such thing. This is evidence. You are conducting illegal surveillance on the residents of Whispering Pines. I am protecting them from deviants like you." The irony was a physical force, so thick I could taste it. She, the one who had illegally entered my land to take something that wasn't hers, was calling me the deviant. It was a fascinating, if infuriating, look into a mind warped by a tiny sliver of authority. This wasn't about a camera. This was about control. My 10 acres of freedom were an affront to her meticulously regulated world, and she was determined to bring it to heel, one fabricated violation at a time. The problem for her was that she wasn't dealing with a terrified suburbanite who would fold at the first sign of a threatening letter. She was dealing with a man who understood rules, lines, and escalation better than she ever would. She had just crossed a line she couldn't see, and in doing so, she had handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. "Last chance, Karen," I said, letting her first name drop into the air between us like a stone. The use of her name, stripped of her presidential title, was a deliberate psychological jab. It reframed her from an authority figure to just a trespassing neighbor. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe even a sliver of fear crossed her face before the mask of outrage slammed back into place. "You will address me as Mrs. Miller, or President Miller," she hissed, "and I will be seeing you in court." She turned then, clutching my camera, and stomped back across the property line, her moo-moo fluttering behind her like the cape of some low-budget supervillain. I didn't follow. I didn't yell. I just stood there watching her retreat. I pulled out my phone, opened the app connected to my home security system, and saved the high-definition, crystal-clear footage of the entire encounter, from her trespassing to her threats to her theft. Then I walked back to my house. It was time to see what else my little trail camera had recorded before it was confiscated for the good of the neighborhood. I had a feeling Karen's definition of good was about to be severely tested. I gave her the 24 hours I promised, a grace period I knew she wouldn't use. It wasn't an act of kindness, it was a strategic step. It demonstrated my reasonableness to any future authorities who might get involved. In any conflict, the first person to lose their temper often loses the war. I spent that evening not fuming but preparing. I sat at my large oak desk, a relic from my grandfather, and opened my laptop. The cloud service for the trail camera had already synced everything right up until the moment Karen's face filled the frame, her eyes wide with a sort of crazed discovery, followed by the jerky, chaotic footage of her wrestling with the strap. I downloaded every file, creating redundant copies on an encrypted external drive. Then I started watching. For the first few days, the footage was exactly what I expected. A doe and her two fawn-ins grazing at dusk, a fat raccoon meticulously washing something in a puddle, a majestic buck with a full rack staring directly into the lens before disappearing like a ghost. This was why I'd put the camera up. This was the piece I had sought. But as I clicked through the files from the past week, the fauna changed. The first anomaly was Karen's little white poodle, a yapping creature named Princess Fluffybutt, according to the custom-engraved tag I'd once glimpsed. The video showed Karen walking the dog along the HOA common path. She stopped, looked around conspiratorially, and then unhooked the leash, letting the dog run onto the perfectly manicured lawn of a corner house. A house I knew belonged to the Henderson family, who had a prominent "no pets" sign on their lawn. The dog did its business, Karen waited patiently, and then she called it back and walked away, leaving the mess right in the middle of their prize-winning zoysia grass. I saved the file, naming it Henderson_incident. An hour of scrolling later, I found something else. It was late at night, the infrared turning the world a ghostly white. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Karen again, this time dressed in a dark tracksuit. She was carrying a can of spray paint. She moved swiftly to a small sign planted in the grass of the HOA common area. It was a campaign sign, "Vote for David Fletcher for HOA board." With a few quick sprays of black paint, the sign was obliterated. She shook the can, gave her work a satisfied look, and scurried back into the darkness. So not only was she a petty tyrant, She was also engaged in what looked like election tampering within her own little fiefdom. I saved the file, Fletcher_sign_vandalism. I was starting to see a pattern. This wasn't just about a misplaced sense of authority. This was a woman who actively sabotaged anyone she perceived as a rival or who simply didn't adhere to her personal standards. The camera she had stolen wasn't just a camera, it was a silent witness to her own hypocrisy. The next morning, precisely 24 hours after our confrontation, I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. I reported the trespassing and the theft of my property, valued at around $450. I gave them Karen's name and address. An hour later, a deputy named Miller, no relation thankfully, showed up at my door. He was young, professional, and had a weary look that suggested he'd seen his fair share of petty neighborhood disputes. I invited him in, offered him a coffee, which he declined, and laid out the facts calmly and chronologically. I showed him the survey plot for my property and the clear markers. I showed him the high-definition video from my home security system of Karen trespassing, stealing the camera, and admitting to it while threatening me. He watched the footage on my laptop, his expression unreadable. "Well, she definitely crossed onto your property and took your camera," he said, handing the laptop back. "No doubt about that." "So, that's trespassing and theft," I stated. "Technically, yes," he hedged. "But look, Mr. Thorne, I'll be straight with you. We can go over there and talk to her. She'll likely say it was a misunderstanding, that she thought it was on HOA land, that she was concerned about privacy. It becomes a he said, she said. And for a piece of property under $500, the DA is unlikely to press charges. They'll call it a civil matter and tell you to take her to small claims court." It was the exact response I had anticipated, but it was still frustrating. I had video evidence of a crime, and the system was already shrugging. "So you're not going to get my property back?" "I'll go talk to her," Deputy Miller assured me. "I'll explain the situation and strongly encourage her to return it. That's the best I can do right now." He was true to his word. I watched from my window as his cruiser pulled up in front of Karen's house. He was on her porch for about 10 minutes. Karen did most of the talking, her arms waving, her body language a pantomime of victimhood and outrage. The deputy just stood there, occasionally nodding. Eventually he left, got back in his car, and drove away. He didn't come back to my house. He didn't need to. 15 minutes later, my email pinged. It was from the official Whispering Pines HOA account. The subject line was, "Formal citation and notice of pending legal action." The email, written in a florid, pseudo-legalistic style that was clearly Karen's own work, informed me that I had been fined $500 for unauthorized surveillance of a private community and another $250 for creation of a public nuisance. It stated that my surveillance device had been confiscated as evidence and would be held pending an investigation by the HOA's Security and Covenants Committee, a committee that I knew for a fact consisted of her and two of her closest sycophants. The email concluded with a threat. If the fines were not paid within 7 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property and seek further damages in court. It was magnificent. It was a declaration of war written on the stationery of a deluded despot. She had taken the deputy's visit not as a warning, but as an endorsement. In her mind, the law had come and gone, and she had won. She had doubled down, tripled down, and in doing so had given me a documented, time-stamped piece of evidence of her escalating harassment. She thought she was building a case against me. In reality, she was forging the shackles of her own downfall. I saved the email as a PDF, attached it to my growing collection of evidence, and smiled. This was no longer a civil matter. This was personal. But the best was yet to come. I still had one more video file to review, the last one the camera had captured before Karen stole it. The timestamp was from 2 afternoons prior. The lighting was perfect. The audio was surprisingly clear. It showed Karen walking to the edge of the HOA common area, right near my oak tree. She wasn't alone. A man in a collared shirt with a Prestige landscaping logo embroidered on it met her there. He was holding a large, thick manila envelope. The camera recorded their entire hushed conversation. "Everything's set for the renewal," the man said. "The board's a little shaky on the price increase, but you'll handle them." Karen laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. Don't you worry about the board. I handle them. Did you bring the quarterly appreciation bonus? The man looked around nervously, then handed her the envelope. Just like we discussed, Karen, 15%. It's all there. She took the envelope, her fingers caressing it for a moment before she tucked it into her oversized purse. Pleasure doing business with you, Bill, she said. Make sure your boys do a good job on the new petunias. I want the entrance to look extra special for the summer. And there it was, crystal clear, a kickback, a conspiracy to defraud the home owners she was supposed to represent. The fines, the threats, the vandalism, that was all just the appetizer. This was the main course. Her theft of my camera wasn't just a petty crime anymore. She had inadvertently stolen the single piece of evidence that could prove she was a crook. And in her arrogance, she had no idea that I already had a perfect copy. The game had changed. This was no longer about getting a $450 camera back. This was about dismantling an empire of beige vinyl and corruption. And the price tag for Karen's little adventure in trespassing was about to go up. Way up. The police report was a dead end, a formality. I knew the real fight wouldn't be won with a single criminal complaint. It required a broader front, a more strategic approach. Karen saw the world in terms of HOA bylaws and neighborhood gossip. I saw it in terms of evidence, leverage, and endgame. My first step was to understand the enemy's terrain. I needed to know more about the Whispering Pines HOA, its finances, its vulnerabilities. I had the smoking gun with the kickback video, but a single piece of evidence can be challenged, dismissed as a deep fake, or explained away with a convoluted lie. I needed corroboration. I needed a paper trail. I needed allies from inside her own kingdom. I thought about the names from the footage. David Fletcher, the board candidate whose sign she had vandalized. The Henderson family, whose lawn her dog had defiled. These were potential allies, people with existing grievances against Karen. I decided to start with Fletcher. A quick online search told me he was a retired project manager, a detail-oriented guy. Perfect. I found his address in the public HOA directory and decided a personal visit was better than a cold call. I found him in his garage, meticulously organizing his tool collection on a pegboard. He was a tall, lean man in his late 60s with a firm handshake and intelligent eyes. I introduced myself as his neighbor from the adjacent property. "Ah, the man with the woods," he said with a slight smile. "I've often admired your property. A bit of wildness next to all this order." "That order seems to be causing some trouble," I said, getting straight to the point. I explained my situation with Karen, the camera, the trespassing, and the bogus fines. I didn't mention the vandalism of his sign. Not yet. I wanted to gauge his reaction, to see if he was willing to push back against her. Fletcher listened patiently, his expression growing more grim with every detail. When I finished, he sighed and leaned against his workbench. "Son, you've just poked the bear," he said. "Karen Miller has been running this HOA like her own personal piggy bank for 5 years. She operates on intimidation and procedural nonsense. The bylaws are a labyrinth, and she knows every twist and turn. Anyone who questions her gets buried in violation notices for things you wouldn't believe. Your trash can is 2 inches too far to the left. That's a $50 fine. Your kid's bicycle is left in the driveway overnight. That's $75. He told me about the Prestige landscaping contract. It had been awarded 3 years ago without a competitive bidding process. The cost was nearly 40% higher than the previous contractors, and the service was mediocre at best. The annual budget meetings were a joke. Karen would present a vague PowerPoint, refuse to answer specific questions, and use her 2 cronies on the 5-person board to ram through whatever she wanted. "I decided to run for the board to get some transparency," Fletcher explained. "A few of us are fed up. We want to see the detailed financials. We want to rebid the major contracts. That's why she's fighting me so hard." "She's fighting you in more ways than you think," I said. I pulled out my phone, queued up the video of her spray painting his sign, and handed it to him. He watched it, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. He played it again, and a third time. He handed the phone back to me, his jaw tight. "That woman," he said, his voice low and shaking with anger. "That vindictive, cheating woman." I had my first ally. Fletcher was now personally invested. He told me about another resident, a retired forensic accountant named Maria Sanchez. She had been the HOA treasurer until 2 years ago, when she started asking too many questions about the landscaping invoices. Karen had orchestrated a smear campaign, accusing her of incompetence, and forced her to resign from the board. Maria had been quiet ever since, ostracized and disheartened. "She's the key," Fletcher said. "If anyone can unravel Karen's books, it's Maria. But she's scared." Karen threatened her with a lawsuit for defamation. My next visit was to Maria Sanchez. Her house was immaculate, her garden a riot of perfectly arranged colors. She was a small, bird-like woman with sharp, observant eyes that missed nothing. She was wary at first, listening to my story from behind her screen door. But when I mentioned David Fletcher had sent me, she opened it a crack. I told her the same story I told Fletcher, but I focused on the financial aspect, the opaque budget, the exorbitant landscaping contract. I could see the old fire rekindle in her eyes, the professional curiosity of an accountant who smells a cooked book. "I knew it," she whispered, more to herself than to me. The numbers never added up. The invoices from that company were always vague. Grounds maintenance, seasonal planting, no itemization, no hourly breakdown. When I demanded specifics, Karen told me I was overstepping my role. I knew I needed to give her something more to overcome her fear. I made a calculated decision. I showed her the video, the final one, the one with the envelope. I watched her face as she saw the kickback, the blatant exchange of cash for contracts. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a steely resolve. The accountant had seen the irrefutable entry on the wrong side of the ledger. To defraud, the members of this community to defraud, the members of this community are the victims. We had our team. I was the strategist, the one with the core evidence. Fletcher was the political organizer, the public face from within the community. Maria was the financial expert, the one who could translate the crime into dollars and cents that every homeowner would understand. We spent the next 2 hours in her kitchen, a plan forming over coffee and spreadsheets she had kept from her time as treasurer. Maria would use the HOA bylaws, which guaranteed any member the right to inspect financial records with reasonable notice, to formally request every invoice from Prestige Landscaping for the past 3 years. Karen could delay, but she couldn't legally refuse without openly violating the covenants. Fletcher would begin quietly talking to other homeowners, building a coalition of the fed up, preparing them for a fight. My role was to prepare the legal assault. The evidence was strong, but it needed to be deployed with precision. Karen thought this was a battle of fines and angry emails. She had no idea we were preparing to bring charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. She was playing checkers, and we were setting up a multi-front war. As I left Maria's house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfect lawns of whispering pines. It felt symbolic. The shadows were lengthening for Karen Miller's reign. She thought she was safe in her little castle, protected by her rules and her cronies. But we were coming. We had the truth on our side, and even better, we had it all on video. She had stolen my camera, but in doing so, she had given us the one thing we needed to burn her kingdom to the ground. With the team in place, the next phase was to build the legal scaffolding for our attack. A disorganized mob with torches and pitchforks might make a lot of noise, but they rarely win against an entrenched bureaucracy. A well-prepared legal case, on the other hand, is a precision weapon. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. My military experience taught me the value of specialized expertise. When you need a bridge built, you call an engineer. When you need a fortress taken down, you call in the lawyers. I reached out to an old contact from my Army days, a woman who had served in the Judge Advocate General's Corps before going into private practice. Her name was Anne Devereaux, and she was sharper than a shard of glass. She specialized in property disputes and, as she liked to call it, predatory association litigation. She hated HOA bullies with a fiery passion. We met at her downtown office, a place of quiet, organized power with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal texts. From the beginning, my voice calm and measured, sticking to the facts. Anne listened without interruption, her fingers steepled, her eyes fixed on me. She had a poker face that could bankrupt a casino. When I was done, I pushed the USB drive across the table to her. On this drive, I said, is the video from my home security system showing the trespass and theft. It also contains 3 key video files from the stolen trail camera's cloud backup. The first shows Karen Miller enabling her dog to defecate on a neighbor's lawn. The second shows her vandalizing an opponent's campaign sign. The third, Ushvasha, I pause for effect, shows her accepting a cash kickback from the owner of the HOA's landscaping contractor. Anne's eyebrow arched, the first flicker of emotion she'd shown. She took the drive, plugged it into her laptop, and put on a pair of headphones. She watched the videos in order. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her lean a little closer to the screen when the kickback video played. She replayed that one twice. Finally, she took off the headphones and looked at me. Well, Mr. Thorne, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. You've brought me a beautiful gift-wrapped case. This isn't just a dispute. It's a buffet of torts and potential felonies. She stood up and walked to a large whiteboard on the wall, a tool she clearly used to map out her battles. Let's break this down, she said, uncapping a black marker. First, we have your personal case against Karen Miller. Not against the HOA, but against her personally. This is crucial. We want to pierce the corporate veil and go after her assets. We sue for trespassing, conversion, that's the civil term for theft, and defamation based on the libelous email she sent you. She wrote civil suit Thorne versus Miller on the board and underlined it twice. We will seek punitive damages. We're going to make this very, very painful for her personally. Second, she continued, drawing a separate box, we have the internal HOA action. Your allies, E. Fletcher and Sanchez, will spearhead this. Maria's request to inspect the financials is the opening salvo. When Karen inevitably stonewalls or provides incomplete records, that's a breach of her fiduciary duty to the homeowners. This gives Fletcher grounds to rally support for a special meeting to force an independent audit and vote for her removal. She labeled this box internal pressure, the audit. Third, and this is the kill shot, she said, drawing a large star next to it, is the criminal complaint. The kickback video is probable cause for a criminal investigation into embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. We don't go to the local cops for this. They'll kick it around forever. We package this whole thing, the video, Maria's financial analysis once she gets the records, and sworn affidavits from you and Fletcher, and we walk it directly into the district attorney's office. White-collar crime prosecutors love cases with clear video evidence. She wrote criminal referral, DA's office, on the board. The strategy was brilliant in its multi-pronged approach. The civil suit would put immediate, personal pressure on Karen. The internal HOA action would undermine her power base from within, and the criminal referral would be the final public blow that would destroy her completely. Each front supported the others. Your job, Mr. Thorne, Anne said, turning back to me, is to remain the calm, wronged party. You are the reasonable man who was trespassed against and stolen from. Let her continue to send unhinged emails. Let her rant and rave. Every unhinged action she takes from this point forward only helps our case. She will be her own worst enemy. We spent another hour working out the details. Anne would draft the civil complaint immediately, but we would wait for the perfect moment to serve it. Timing was everything. We wanted to hit her when she was already off balance from the internal pressure. I left her office feeling a sense of clarity and purpose. The anger I had felt was now channeled into a cold, methodical plan. Karen thought she was fighting a simple neighbor. She had no idea she had just walked into a coordinated legal, political, and financial ambush. The paperwork she loved to weaponize was about to be turned against her with overwhelming force. While Anne prepared the legal documents, Maria Sanchez formally submitted her request to inspect the financial records, citing the specific article and section of the HOA bylaws. The response from Karen was predictable. An email arrived 2 days later stating that the request was overly broad and burdensome, and that Maria would need to submit a more specific request, detailing which exact documents she wanted to see and for what purpose. It was a classic bureaucratic stonewall designed to frustrate and exhaust the requester into giving up. It was also a direct violation of the bylaws, which stated that all financial records were open for inspection by any member. This was the first tripwire we had laid, and Karen had walked right into it. Maria, with Anne's guidance, sent a polite but firm response, restating her right under the bylaws and giving the board 10 business days to comply before she would file a formal complaint. The clock was now ticking. Fletcher, meanwhile, was making his rounds. He wasn't calling for a revolution. His approach was much more subtle. He'd strike up conversations at the community mailbox or in the grocery store. "Did you see the new landscaping budget?" he'd ask a neighbor. "Seems a little high, doesn't it? I wonder where all that money is going." He planted seeds of doubt, leveraging the quiet, simmering resentment that so many residents already felt. He was building a consensus, not a mob. The ground was being prepared. Karen, oblivious, continued her reign of petty terror, perhaps even emboldened by my silence. She sent me another email, this one demanding payment for the disposal of my hazardous surveillance equipment. She had apparently decided my trail camera was now a biohazard. I saved the email and forwarded it to Anne, who simply replied with a smiley face emoji. Every word Karen wrote was another nail in her own coffin. She was so convinced of her own power, she couldn't see the trap slowly closing around her. The 10-day deadline Maria had given the board passed in silence. Karen's strategy was clearly to ignore the problem until it went away. It was a fatal miscalculation. On the 11th day, David Fletcher, armed with Maria's documented and unanswered request, officially began the petition drive. The HOA bylaws stipulated that a petition signed by just 15% of homeowners could force a special meeting to address a specific issue. The issue on their petition was simple and devastatingly reasonable: to authorize a full, independent, forensic audit of the association's finances for the past 3 fiscal years. Fletcher didn't need to campaign hard. He walked door to door with a clipboard and the doors open. He spoke to neighbors who had been fined for having the wrong color welcome mat, to families who had been cited because their children's laughter was deemed a noise nuisance, to people who were simply sick of the ever-increasing fees and the condescending tone of the monthly newsletter. He told them about Maria's request to see the books and how Karen had illegally stonewalled her. He didn't have to show them the videos or even mention the kickback scheme. He just had to point out the smoke. And people were more than ready to believe there was a fire. Within 3 days, he had signatures from over 40% of the homeowners. It was a landslide of discontent. The petition was formally submitted to the HOA board via certified mail, creating a paper trail that couldn't be ignored. This official act finally pierced Karen's bubble of arrogant denial. The reaction was volcanic. That evening, a mass email went out to every resident of Whispering Pines. The subject line in all caps read, "An urgent warning regarding malicious outsiders and internal disruption." The email was a masterpiece of paranoid projection and libel. In it, Karen claimed that a disgruntled non-resident with a history of intimidating behavior, that would be me, was colluding with a small group of serial complainers, Fletcher and his supporters, to destroy the financial stability and peaceful harmony of our community. She accused the petitioners of being motivated by personal vendettas and of trying to avoid paying their fair share. She then made her most critical error. She wrote, "Be warned that any resident who has signed this illegal and malicious petition is engaging in conduct detrimental to the community and may be subject to fines and sanctions as determined by the Covenants Committee." I read the email and immediately forwarded it to Anne. Her reply came back in less than a minute. "It's like Christmas in July. This is a direct, written threat against residents for exercising their rights under the bylaws. It's unambiguous evidence of malice and a breach of her fiduciary duty. We're adding this to the lawsuit." Karen's email had the opposite of its intended effect. People who had been on the fence were now furious. Being told you might be fined for asking a question is a sure way to turn apathy into anger. Phones started ringing all over the neighborhood. An unofficial neighborhood watch, once dedicated to reporting suspicious cars, was now a private message group dedicated to organizing against the HOA board. Karen's attempt to intimidate had galvanized the opposition. She had drawn a line in the sand, and nearly the entire community had just crossed it to stand on the other side. The pressure continued to mount. The landscaping company, Prestige Landscaping, suddenly became more aggressive. Crews started showing up at odd hours, running loud leaf blowers at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. They accidentally trampled flower beds belonging to known petition signers. One resident found his driveway blocked for 2 hours by one of their large trucks, the driver claiming he was on break. It was a clumsy, transparent attempt at intimidation by proxy, and it only made things worse. It linked Karen's tyranny directly to the company everyone already suspected was fleecing them. The community was now a powder keg, and Karen Miller was dancing on top of it with gasoline-soaked shoes. Fletcher, Maria, and I met again, this time with a half-dozen other key homeowners at Fletcher's house. The mood was electric. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of righteous purpose. Maria had prepared a preliminary financial analysis based on the old, vague budgets. Even without the invoices, she could show a massive, unexplained year-over-year increase in grounds maintenance costs that far outpaced inflation or any new services provided. She presented her findings on a television screen in Fletcher's living room, using charts and graphs that were easy for everyone to understand. This black area, she said, pointing to a rapidly growing slice of a pie chart, represents more than $60,000 a year that is effectively unaccounted for. It goes to one vendor with no oversight and no competitive bidding. Where is that money going? The room was silent. Everyone knew the answer. They might not have known about the manila envelope, but they knew they were being robbed. The petition had given them a voice. Maria's analysis had given them a motive. They were no longer just disgruntled individuals. They were a united front, a citizens' committee on the verge of open rebellion. According to the bylaws, once the petition was submitted, the board had 30 days to schedule the special meeting. For 2 weeks, there was nothing but silence from Karen. But we knew she couldn't ignore it forever. She was legally trapped. She had to call the meeting. And when she did, we would be ready. The stage was being swung for a public confrontation, a showdown where her power would be put to the test in front of the very people she had bullied for so long. She thought she still held all the cards, but she had no idea that her entire hand was a bluff, and we were holding a royal flush. The final piece of our pre-confrontation strategy was to serve her with the lawsuit. Ann and I decided the optimal time would be 2 days before the big meeting. It would ensure she was rattled, emotionally compromised, and legally distracted when she had to face the community. Ann hired a professional process server, a big, no-nonsense guy built like a refrigerator. He waited until Karen was collecting her mail from the community mailbox kiosk, a public place. "Karen Miller?" he boomed as she fumbled with a stack of catalogs. She looked up, startled. "I am." "You've been served," he said, handing her the thick packet of legal documents. A neighbor who was also getting her mail witnessed the entire exchange. The news spread through the Whispering Pines gossip network like wildfire. Karen had been served with a lawsuit right out in the open. The humiliation was immense. The lawsuit itself was a work of art. Ann had laid out the case in excruciating detail. The date and time of the trespass, complete with photographic evidence from my security camera, a verbatim transcript of her admission and threats, a copy of the libelous email she sent me, and a demand for damages that was high enough to be terrifying. Crucially, the lawsuit named Karen Miller as the sole defendant. The HOA was not named. This meant the HOA's liability insurance would not cover her legal fees. She was on her own. Her personal assets, her house, her savings, were now officially on the line. The Queen was no longer protected by the castle walls. We had brought the fight directly to her doorstep. The day of the special meeting arrived, thick with anticipation. The community center, a sterile room usually reserved for potlucks and holiday parties, was filled to capacity. People were standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. I saw faces I recognized from my walks around the neighborhood, faces I'd seen mowing their lawns or washing their cars, all of them now united by a common purpose. Their expressions were a mixture of anger, anxiety, and a flicker of hope. I took a seat in the back row, positioning myself as an observer. This was their fight to lead. Fletcher, Maria, and the other members of the Concerned Homeowners Committee sat in the front row, a neat stack of papers and binders on their laps. They looked like a prosecution team preparing for a trial. At the front of the room, Karen sat at a long table with the other 4 board members. She looked haggard. The stress of the lawsuit was clearly taking its toll. Her usual mask of smug superiority was replaced by a brittle, defensive glare. The two board members who were her loyal cronies looked nervous, while the other two looked deeply uncomfortable, physically leaning away from her as if her toxicity were contagious. The meeting began with Karen banging a small wooden gavel, the sound ridiculously inadequate for the tension in the room. She tried to control the proceedings from the start, reading from a prepared statement about the importance of community unity and decrying the divisive tactics of a few misguided individuals. She attempted to dismiss the petition on a technicality, claiming some of the signatures were illegible. Fletcher was immediately on his feet. "Point of order, Madam President," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through her rambling. "We have more than double the required number of verified signatures. The purpose of this meeting, as mandated by the bylaws you swore to uphold, is to vote on the motion for a full, independent forensic audit. Please proceed with the motion." The room erupted in applause and shouts of "Vote! Vote! Vote!" Karen banged her gavel again, her face flushed with fury. "Order! There will be order!" she shrieked. But she had already lost control. The community was no longer afraid of her. For the next 20 minutes, she tried every trick in the book to delay and deflect. She tried to adjourn the meeting, but the motion was shouted down. She tried to limit public comments to 1 minute per person, but people simply ignored her and kept talking. One after another, residents stood up and aired their grievances. An elderly woman spoke with a trembling voice about the citation she received for her bird feeder being an attractant for vermin. A young father angrily described how his children were no longer allowed to draw with chalk on their own driveway because it violated aesthetic standards. The stories poured out, a torrent of petty indignities and abuses of power that had been simmering for years. Each story was a fresh indictment of Karen's leadership. Finally, it was Maria's turn. She walked to the small lectern set up for speakers, carrying a laptop. "Good evening," she said, her voice quiet. "Good evening," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority. "My name is Maria Sanchez. I am a certified forensic accountant with 40 years of experience, and I was your treasurer until Mrs. Miller forced my resignation for asking too many questions." She proceeded to deliver a masterclass in financial deconstruction. She walked the audience through the HOA's budgets, showing the skyrocketing costs of landscaping that defied all logic. She showed them comparisons with quotes from other local companies, revealing that Whispering Pines was paying nearly double the market rate. She used simple, clear language, stripping away the jargon and showing everyone in the room exactly how their money was being wasted. "Over the past 3 years," she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction, "this community has paid Prestige Landscaping approximately $190,000 more than what competitive market rates would suggest. I cannot tell you where that money went, but I can tell you that as a fiduciary, the board has a duty to find out. That is why we need an independent audit." The room was dead silent. Maria had laid the crime out for everyone to see, not with accusations, but with hard numbers. All eyes turned to Karen. She was cornered, exposed. The two independent board members looked horrified, as if seeing the scale of the deception for the first time. This was the moment her reign truly crumbled. And like all tyrants in their final moments, she didn't surrender with dignity. She exploded. "This is slander," she screamed, leaping to her feet and pointing a trembling finger at Maria. "You are a bitter old woman who was fired for incompetence. You have no right. These numbers are lies. It's a lies." She turned on Fletcher. "And you? You're just a power-hungry snake trying to take over." Her composure completely shattered. Her voice cracked. Her face was a grotesque mask of rage. "This is my community. I built it. I protect it from people like you and from outsiders." Her eyes found me in the back of the room and she pointed directly at me. "He's the one. He's the criminal. With his hidden cameras, spying on our children. He started all of this." It was a spectacular, public self-immolation. She wasn't just losing an argument. She was demonstrating to every person in that room that she was mentally and emotionally unfit to lead. She was confirming every suspicion they ever had about her. She was a bully, a liar, and now, clearly, unhinged. Passed with a thunderous roar of "I!" from the crowd. The two cronies voted no. George and the other independent member voted yes. Karen, in a final act of petulant defiance, abstained. But it didn't matter. The motion carried. The independent audit was coming. Karen Miller slumped back into her chair, defeated. The public humiliation was total. She had been stripped of her authority in front of the entire community. She had lost the battle, but she had no idea that the war was about to escalate to a level she couldn't even comprehend. As the meeting broke up, people were congratulating Fletcher and Maria. There was a palpable sense of liberation in the air. I slipped out the back, my job there done. The public confrontation had been a resounding success. Karen's power base was shattered. Her reputation was in tatters. And she was still completely unaware of the final, devastating blow that was about to fall. The legal trap was set, the bait had been taken, and the jaws were about to snap shut. The morning after the disastrous HOA meeting was a beautiful sunny day, the kind of day that felt full of promise. For Karen Miller, it was the day her world ended. At 9 a.m. sharp, 2 unmarked cars pulled up to her house. 4 people in sober business suits got out and walked up to her door. They weren't from the sheriff's department. They were investigators from the district attorney's economic crimes unit. Anne had delivered our package the previous afternoon. She had presented the DA's office with a case so complete, so thoroughly documented, that they had been able to secure a search warrant from a judge in a matter of hours. The package contained my sworn affidavit about the camera and the theft. It contained Fletcher's affidavit about the vandalism and Karen's political intimidation. It contained Maria's preliminary financial analysis, and it contained the star of the show, a high-resolution copy of the trail camera video showing Karen Miller accepting a thick manila envelope from Bill, the owner of Prestige Landscaping. The warrant allowed them to seize all personal and HOA-related financial records, computers, phones, and any other evidence related to a criminal investigation into fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. A similar scene was playing out simultaneously at the small, unassuming office of Prestige Landscaping across town. The investigators were seizing their computers, their invoice records, and their bank statements. The pincer movement was complete. I watched the scene at Karen's house unfold from a distance using a pair of binoculars from my upstairs window. I saw her open the door, her face a mixture of confusion and belligerence. I saw the lead investigator show her the warrant. Her face went pale. The blustering, domineering HOA president vanished, replaced by a terrified, cornered woman. They were inside her house for over 3 hours. They came out carrying several evidence boxes filled with documents and electronics. Karen was escorted out to one of the cars. She wasn't in handcuffs, not yet, but the disgrace was absolute. Her neighbors were out on their lawns, pretending to garden or check their mail, but they were all watching. The Queen was being frog-marched from her castle in broad daylight. The news of the raid spread through Whispering Pines faster than a brush fire. The community message boards lit up. The whispers and rumors were finally replaced by the hard, undeniable fact of a criminal investigation. The why was answered when details from the search warrant were inevitably leaked to the local news. The headline on the local news website that evening was stark: Local HOA. President investigated for alleged kickback scheme. The story mentioned an unnamed landscape contractor and a sum of money believed to be in the 6 figures. The pieces all clicked into place for the residents. The high fees, the single-source contract, the stonewalling. It all made sense now. The legal trap had sprung perfectly. With her records seized and her co-conspirators' records also in the hands of the DA, there was nowhere for Karen to hide. Bill, the owner of Prestige Landscaping, folded within 48 hours. Presented with the video and the evidence from his own bank records, which showed large, regular cash withdrawals corresponding to the quarterly appreciation bonuses, his lawyer advised him to cut a deal. He gave a full confession, detailing the entire scheme. He explained how he and Karen had agreed to inflate the contract price by 30%, with half of that excess, 15% of the total contract value, being kicked back to her in cash every quarter. He agreed to testify against her in exchange for a plea bargain on a lesser charge. For Karen, there would be no deal. She was the public official, the one who had breached the public trust. The DA was going to make an example of her. A week later, Karen Miller was formally arrested and charged with multiple felonies. Her mugshot, featuring a puffy, tear-streaked face and a vacant expression, was plastered all over the internet. It was a pathetic, ignominious end to her reign of terror. In the midst of her criminal implosion, she still had my civil suit to deal with. Her lawyer, a man clearly overwhelmed by the mountain of trouble his client was in, called Anne to discuss a settlement. Anne was merciless. She knew we had all the leverage. Karen was now a soon-to-be convicted felon whose public statements and emails showed a clear pattern of malice. Going to court would be a costly exercise in public flagellation for her. She agreed to settle. The terms were harsh. Karen had to pay for the replacement of my camera at its full retail value. She had to pay every dollar of my legal fees to Anne. And on top of that, she had to pay a significant five-figure sum in punitive damages for the harassment, libel, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was a painful financial blow that wiped out a good portion of her savings, money she desperately needed for her criminal defense. She also had to sign a legally binding statement, which would be read at the next HOA meeting, publicly apologizing to me for her actions. The legal trap had not only removed her from power and subjected her to criminal prosecution, but it had also hit her directly in the one place she truly cared about, her wallet. Her attempt to bully me over a $500 fine had now cost her tens of thousands of dollars, with the prospect of prison time and massive criminal restitution still to come. The justice was cold, methodical, and deeply, deeply satisfying. The downfall of Karen Miller sent shockwaves through the community, but they were waves of relief, not chaos. With her arrest and the ongoing criminal case, the HOA was in turmoil. The two board members, who had been her loyal cronies, resigned in disgrace within a day of the raid, fearing they would be implicated in the scandal. This left the board without a quorum and unable to function. At an emergency meeting, the remaining two members, George and the other independent, voted to appoint David Fletcher and Maria Sanchez as interim board members until a special election could be held. It was a new dawn for Whispering Pines. The first act of the new board was to fire Prestige Landscaping. Their contract was terminated for cause, citing the ongoing criminal investigation. Within a week, they had solicited bids from 3 local, well-regarded landscaping companies. They awarded the new contract to a family-owned business whose bid was nearly half of what Prestige had been charging. The savings to the HOA were immediate and substantial. The second act was to hire the independent forensic auditing firm as mandated by the community vote. The auditors descended on the records seized by the DA and the HOA's own files, and over the next month they pieced together the full extent of Karen's corruption. Their final report was presented at another packed community meeting. It was a bombshell. The kickback scheme was even more extensive than we had initially thought. It wasn't just the landscaping contract. Karen had been getting smaller kickbacks from a paving company, a pool maintenance service, and even the company that supplied the paper for the community newsletter. All told, she had defrauded the homeowners of Whispering Pines of more than $220,000 over her 5-year tenure as president. The number that stuck in everyone's mind, however, was the one from the landscaping deal, the one my camera had uncovered. $190,000. That was the figure the district attorney used when they announced the final charges against her. Faced with an avalanche of evidence in the testimony of her former co-conspirators, Karen took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony grand larceny and conspiracy to defraud. She was sentenced to 2 years in state prison, 5 years of probation, and was ordered to pay back every single cent she had stolen in restitution. The $190,000 figure became the symbol of her greed and her downfall. As for me, my life returned to the quiet I had always wanted. The civil settlement check from Karen arrived via courier. I used a small portion of it to buy a new state-of-the-art trail camera, a significant upgrade from the one she had stolen. I installed it on the very same oak tree, not because I was worried about trespassers anymore, but as a silent monument to the principle of standing your ground. One evening, a few weeks after the sentencing, I was sitting on my back porch, watching the fireflies begin to dot the tree line. I saw 3 figures walking along the edge of my property: Fletcher, Maria, and George. They stopped at the survey marker and called out to me. I walked over to meet them. "We don't want to trespass," Fletcher said with a warm smile. "We just wanted to come thank you, in person." Maria handed me an envelope. This is from the HOA, she explained. The board voted unanimously to reimburse you for all your initial legal expenses before the settlement. We also included a good neighbor bonus. We figured it was the least we could do for the man who saved our community. It was a gesture that meant more than the money. It was an acknowledgement, a restoration of civility and respect between neighbors. You didn't have to do that, I said, genuinely touched. Yes, we did, George insisted. You taught us all a valuable lesson, Mr. Thorne. You showed us that one person, standing up to a bully with facts and determination, can change everything. We stood there for a while just talking. They told me about the changes they were making. The HOA fees were being lowered for the first time in a decade. They had established a new ethics committee and put transparent financial controls in place to ensure nothing like this could ever happen again. They were rewriting the bylaws to be fairer and less punitive. They were, in essence, detoxifying the community, cleansing it of the poison Karen had injected into it for so long. The special election was held the following month. Fletcher was elected the new president, Maria the new treasurer. Turned back one last time. You know, he turned back one last time. You know, he said, that camera of yours did more than just catch a thief. It gave a whole neighborhood its voice back. We never saw Karen again. After she served her time, she sold her house and moved away, a disgraced and broken woman. The house was bought by a young family with 2 kids whose laughter now filled the air on summer afternoons. The community she had ruled with an iron fist was now thriving in her absence, friendlier and more united than ever before. Sometimes late at night, the cloud server for my new trail camera sends an alert to my phone. I'll open it, and most of the time, it's just a familiar image of a deer or a raccoon going about its business in the quiet dark. It always makes me smile. It's a reminder that my little piece of the world is back to being what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary. A place of peace, earned through a quiet, relentless fight for justice, all because one arrogant woman stole a camera and showed the world exactly who she was.